Next topic is the neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitters are the chemical substances that are important in propagating the nerve impulse. They are located in the synaptic vesicles of the presynaptic knob and they are released into the synaptic cleft when adequate stimulus is generated in the presynaptic membrane. These neurotransmitters are secreted, or we can say synthesized by the neuronal cell bodies. They are transported along the axon into the presynaptic knobs and they are stored in the synaptic vesicles until they are released. So the postsynaptic membrane has receptors for these neurotransmitters to bind. When a neurotransmitter is released into the synaptic cleft and taken up by the receptors of the postsynaptic membrane, it causes polarization of the membrane. So either it is in the form of hyperpolarization or depolarization. So here the first is the excitatory synapse. If a neurotransmitter depolarizes the postsynaptic membrane, it is called as excitatory neurotransmitter, hence the synapse is excitatory in nature. If you see the inhibitory synapse, it is a neurotransmitter that hyperpolarizes the postsynaptic membrane, that is inhibitory neurotransmitter. That's the reason we will say that synapse will be the inhibitory synapse. So what is the fate of a neurotransmitter? The neurotransmitter is released into the synaptic cleft and acts extremely for a shorter duration and is quickly inactivated by the enzyme taken up by the presynaptic axon terminal. The neuroglia, especially the astrocytes, help in the metabolism of the neurotransmitters by taking up the excessive neurotransmitters, and thereby it maintains a suitable metabolic environment for the neurons. If you see the examples of the neurotransmitters over here, the acetylcholine is the first one. Acetylcholine is present in both CNS and PNS and is one of the most common neurotransmitter in the body. The neurons with acetylcholine as the neurotransmitter are called cholinergic neurons. In the peripheral nervous system, if you see, it is found in all autonomic preganglionic neurons, postganglionic parasympathetic neurons and postganglionic sympathetic neurons supplying the sweat glands and blood vessels and skeletal muscles. And in the central nervous system, it is found in the spinal motor neurons and cells of beds in the brain and the cells of basal ganglia. The receptors for the acetylcholine at the postsynaptic membrane are called as cholinergic receptors, and they are of two types: nicotinic receptors and muscarinic receptors. The nicotinic receptors are present in the plasma membrane of all sympathetic and parasympathetic postganglionic neurons and also at the motor end plate of the neuromuscular junction, while the muscarinic receptors are present in the plasma membrane of the smooth muscles, glands, cardiac muscles, and they are supplied by the parasympathetic postganglionic fibers. What is the fate of acetylcholine over here? An enzyme known as acetylcholinesterase is present in the synaptic cleft and it inactivates the acetylcholine by splitting into choline and acetate. And this choline is taken up by the presynaptic axon and utilized for the synthesis of new acetylcholine molecules. And next is amines. So the amine derivative neurotransmitters are of norepinephrine, epinephrine, dopamine, serotonin and histamine. If you see the norepinephrine and epinephrine, these are together called as adrenergic neurotransmitters and the receptors are called as adrenergic receptors. The norepinephrine is secreted by the postganglionic sympathetic nerve endings and epinephrine is mainly secreted by the adrenal medulla. So there are two main types of adrenergic receptors. They are alpha as well as beta. And next is dopamine. Dopamine present mostly in the basal nuclei of the brain, and the serotonin is also called as 5-hydroxytryptamine, and the receptors are present in the central nervous system as well as the gastrointestinal tract. And next is histamine. The receptors for the histamine are present in the hypothalamus and limbic system. Apart from the CNS, histaminic receptors are also present on the blood vessels, lungs, as well as on the peripheral tissues. Next, the neurotransmitters which are derived from the amino acids. So here the glycine, aspartate, glutamate and GABA. Out of these, glycine and GABA are inhibitory neurotransmitters, whereas the aspartate and the glutamate are excitatory in nature. GABA is found in the brain, spinal cord as well as in the retina. Other examples are nitric oxide, adenosine triphosphate, etc. So if you see the sequence of events which takes place in the synapse, in a typical synapse we can say, initially the nerve impulse, that is called as action potential, depolarizes or hyperpolarizes the presynaptic membrane. And the next step what happens is, the voltage sensitive calcium channels are open and there will be an influx of the calcium into the cytosol of the synaptic knob. And this particular influx of the calcium ions causes the synaptic vesicles to fuse with the presynaptic membrane and released into the synaptic cleft by means of exocytosis. So here the acetylcholine diffuses across the synaptic cleft and binds to the receptors, or we can say the receptor molecules which are located on the postsynaptic membrane, and this alters the permeability of the postsynaptic membrane to ions, for examples like sodium, calcium, potassium, chloride. This leads to depolarization at excitatory synapses or hyperpolarization at inhibitory synapse. So here the release of the neurotransmitter ceases as the calcium ions are removed from the cytosol of the synaptic knob. So the transmission is ceased as the neurotransmitter is either metabolized by the enzyme or taken up by the synaptic knobs. This is what you need to know about the events which take place during the neuronal transmission. Next is, what is the neuromediation? So whenever there is a repeated synaptic activity on the receptors of a neuron that might have some structural changes like formation of new synapses as well as alterations in the new growth of axons or dendritic tree. This type of modification at the synapse is called as neuromediation, and the chemical substances that are called neuromediators. Example of the neuromediators are the neurohormones. Some of the chemicals which are released from the neuron don't directly influence the postsynaptic membrane, but they may act or influence the effects of other neurotransmitters by either increasing or decreasing their actions. These kind of chemical substances, what we studied, are called as neuromodulators. The examples are neuropeptide substance P, vasoactive intestinal polypeptide called as VIP, somatostatin, cholecystokinin, oxytocin, ADH, enkephalins and endorphins comes under this category. So by this we completed our topic, that is neurotransmitters.